my God, look at that piece of junk. You actually ride that?
She laughed. The whole parking lot laughed with her. And in that moment, nobody, not one single person, had any idea that they were laughing at the wrong person. But we'll get back to that. Because what happened next didn't just silence a campus. It changed everything. Let me take you back to the very beginning. Hartwell University, one of the most prestigious private universities on the East Coast. The kind of place where the cars in the student parking lot cost more than most people's houses, where designer bags hang off shoulders like accessories, and the right last name opens more doors than any grade point average ever could. This was a world built on appearances, and everyone knew the unspoken rules. Then came Tyler. Tyler Bennett didn't arrive at Hartwell in a car. He didn't arrive in an Uber. He didn't even arrive on a motorcycle, something that might have at least carried a certain kind of rebellious cool. Tyler arrived on a bicycle, a scratched-up, slightly rusted, 10-speed bicycle with a worn backpack strapped across his chest and a water bottle clipped to the frame that had clearly seen better days. And on a campus where image was everything, that bicycle might as well have been a target painted on his back. Tyler was a freshman, first-generation college student, the first person in 3 generations of his family to ever set foot inside a university. His mother worked double shifts at a diner in rural Ohio. His father had passed away 4 years earlier from an illness the family couldn't afford to treat properly. Tyler had earned a partial academic scholarship, but partial meant he still had to work 2 jobs just to cover the rest. No car, no luxury apartment. A small room in the cheapest off-campus housing he could find, 12 minutes away by bike. But Tyler didn't talk about any of that, because Tyler wasn't the kind of person who made his struggles into a speech. He just showed up, every single day, quietly, consistently, and he did the work. Nobody noticed. Nobody until Madison. Madison Calloway was, by every visible measure, the queen of Hartwell University. Her father was Richard Calloway, the Richard Calloway, founder of Calloway Enterprises, one of the most powerful real estate development companies in the country. The Calloway name was literally on 2 buildings on campus. Their family had donated enough money to Hartwell to build an entire wing of the Science Center. Madison didn't just attend this university. In many ways, her family owned a piece of it. She drove a white Range Rover that still smelled new even though she'd had it for 8 months. She wore clothes that most students' parents couldn't afford in a lifetime. And she moved through Hartwell with the kind of effortless confidence that only comes from never once having to worry about anything. Madison wasn't purely mean. That's the complicated truth. She had friends who genuinely loved her. She could be warm, funny, even generous when it suited her. But she had grown up in a world where worth was measured in what you had, and that worldview had calcified into something she didn't even realize was cruel. She had never been taught to look at someone like Tyler and see a person. She had only ever been taught to look at someone like Tyler and see a problem with the aesthetic. And on a Tuesday morning in October, that attitude came out. Tyler had just locked his bicycle to the rack near the main parking lot, the same rack he used every morning. It was the closest one to the engineering building where his first class was. He was running slightly late, fumbling with his combination lock, backpack half open, textbook threatening to fall out. And that's when Madison pulled in. Right in front of him, white Range Rover, music playing, sunglasses on, looking like a magazine cover that had somehow come to life. She stepped out and she saw the bicycle first. Then she saw Tyler, struggling with his lock, worn shoes, a jacket that had a small tear along the left sleeve that he'd sewn back up himself, but not perfectly. And Madison laughed. It wasn't a quiet laugh. It wasn't a private, under-her-breath kind of laugh. It was loud, and it had an audience because her friends were already getting out of the car behind her, and 2 other students walking by had stopped to look.
Oh my God, look at that piece of junk. You actually ride that?
"Oh my God," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Did you actually ride that here? Like to college?" She turned to her friends. "Do they even let bikes into the bike rack? I thought that was for scooters." Laughter from her friends, from the two bystanders who didn't want to seem uncool by not laughing. Tyler looked up. His jaw tightened, just slightly. He didn't say anything for a moment. He zipped up his backpack, adjusted the strap across his chest, and looked at her with an expression that was almost impossible to read. Not angry, not humiliated, something quieter than both of those things. "It gets me where I need to go," he said, simply, calmly. "Barely," Madison replied and walked away still laughing. And everyone who watched it happen watched Tyler stand there, alone, next to that scratched-up bicycle, assumed that Madison had won that moment, that Tyler had lost. They were wrong, but they wouldn't know that for a while yet. Now here is where you need to stay with me, because the story that follows is not what you think it is. Most people who heard about what happened that morning expected a revenge story. They expected Tyler to find some dramatic moment to put Madison in her place. Or maybe they expected Tyler to disappear, to quietly crumble under the weight of humiliation, the way so many students do when the social hierarchy of a place like Hartwell comes down on them. Neither of those things happened. What happened instead was something far more unexpected and far more powerful. Tyler went to his classes. He sat in the front row of his engineering lecture, something almost no freshman ever did, and took notes with a focus that his professor would later describe as unlike anything he'd seen in 20 years of teaching. Tyler asked questions that made other students look up from their phones. Questions that cut right to the heart of the material in a way that showed he hadn't just read the textbook. He'd understood it. He'd thought about it. He'd wrestled with it. After class, he went to work. His first job was a part-time position in the university's IT department, fixing computers, setting up systems, troubleshooting network issues. His second job was freelance. And this is the part that matters. Because Tyler Bennett, the boy with the scratched-up bicycle and the torn jacket, had been building something. For the past 3 years, since he was 16 years old and his father was sick and his family was falling apart financially, Tyler had been teaching himself to code. Not just the basics, advanced software development. He'd started with free tutorials online, then moved to open-source projects, then to building his own applications. By the time he arrived at Hartwell, he had already built 2 functional apps, one of which had over 40,000 active users. He wasn't making life-changing money from it yet, but he was building, quietly, consistently, the same way he did everything. And 3 weeks before that morning in the parking lot, Tyler had submitted an application to something called the Hartwell Innovation Competition, a competition that awarded the top student project a $50,000 grant and a mentorship opportunity with some of the biggest names in the technology industry. He hadn't told anyone, he didn't talk about it, he just submitted and waited. Meanwhile, Madison was having her own complicated October. Something had been bothering her, and she couldn't put her finger on what it was. She sat in her classes and the material felt increasingly hollow to her. Not because she wasn't smart, she was, genuinely, but because she'd never been pushed. She'd never had to fight for anything. And deep down, in a place she rarely visited, she was starting to feel the early stirrings of something uncomfortable. Something that felt a lot like emptiness. One afternoon, she walked into her business strategy class 20 minutes late. The professor was mid-sentence, and every seat was taken except for one. Next to Tyler. She sat down without looking at him. He didn't look at her. They sat in silence for the full 90-minute lecture. At the end of it, the professor announced that the class would be moving into paired project assignments, and that the partners had already been assigned based on a skills diversity algorithm the department used. Madison looked at her paper. Her partner was Tyler Bennett. She found him after class. She was not happy. "Look," she said, "I'll just do the project myself and put your name on it. I don't need." "I'm not putting my name on work I didn't do," Tyler said. He didn't even look up from the paper he was reading. Madison blinked. Nobody talked to her like that. "Excuse me. If we're partners, we work together. If you don't want to work together, we go to the professor and get it sorted out." He looked up now. "Your call." It was the directness that got her, the complete absence of either hostility or deference. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't intimidated by her. He was just even, like she was a normal person and he expected her to act like one. She didn't go to the professor. They started meeting in the library 3 times a week, and Madison, who had expected to be bored and slightly annoyed for the duration of this project, found herself doing something she had not anticipated. She found herself genuinely engaged. Because Tyler's mind worked in a way she had never encountered before. He connected ideas across disciplines in ways that felt almost effortless. He challenged her assumptions, not aggressively but persistently. When she would offer a conclusion, he would ask, "But why does that hold?" Until they drilled down to something real and defensible. She'd been in school her entire life and had never once been pushed to think that rigorously. And then one evening, he was late to their library session. He arrived looking slightly shaken, which was unusual for him, because Tyler was almost never visibly shaken by anything. "You okay?" she asked, before she'd even decided to. He looked at her for a moment. Then he sat down and opened his laptop. On the screen was an email. "I got through to the finals of the Hartwell Innovation Competition," he said quietly. She leaned forward and read the email, and then she read the name of the other finalist. She looked up at him. "Wait, your app, that's the one with like 50,000 users." 47,000, he said, "as of this morning." Madison sat back in her chair. She was quiet for a long moment. "You built that yourself?" "Mostly," he paused. "I started when I was 16. After my dad died, he stopped. I just needed something I could control." The library was quiet around them. Madison felt something shift in her chest, something she didn't have a name for yet. The day of the innovation competition finals arrived, and the entire campus was buzzing. The finalists were presenting in the main auditorium. Faculty, students, industry judges, the room was packed. And word had gotten around that one of the finalists was a freshman who had apparently been living so far under the radar that most people had no idea who he was. Tyler walked onto that stage in the same jacket with the barely visible repair along the left sleeve. He had a quiet certainty about him that filled the room before he'd said a single word. His presentation was unlike anything the audience had expected. He didn't open with slides. He opened with a story. His story, the diner in Ohio, his father. The nights he'd spent learning to code with a laptop balanced on his knees in a bedroom so cold he could see his breath because the heating had been cut off. He told it plainly, without seeking sympathy, just stating it as the foundation of what had driven him to build what he'd built. And then he showed them the app. It was a platform designed to connect first-generation college students with academic resources, mentorship opportunities, and emergency financial support, built from his own experience of knowing exactly what those students needed and could never find. 47,000 users, a 93% engagement rate, letters from students across the country saying the platform had helped them stay in school when they were on the verge of dropping out. The auditorium was completely silent. And then one person started clapping, then another, and then the entire room rose to its feet. In the front row, Madison Calloway sat very still. Because in that moment, watching Tyler stand on that stage in his repaired jacket, receiving a standing ovation from the same campus that had laughed at his bicycle, something broke open inside her. Something she'd spent years building around herself without realizing it. She thought about the parking lot. She thought about what she'd said. She thought about the look on his face, that quiet, unreadable expression, and she understood it now. He hadn't been humiliated. He hadn't been angry. He had simply looked at her and seen someone who didn't yet understand what she was looking at. He had been right. She had been wrong. And she cried, right there in the front row of the Hartwell Auditorium, surrounded by people who knew her name and her family's name and the buildings with that name on them. She cried in a way she hadn't cried since she was a little girl, because it's a specific kind of pain, the moment you truly see yourself clearly for the first time. The moment you understand that you have been small in a way that had nothing to do with the size of your bank account. Tyler won the competition. $50,000, a mentorship with one of the most respected names in Silicon Valley, and an invitation to pitch his platform to a group of impact investors who, 3 months later, would offer him a seed funding round that would value his company at just over $2 million. But that's not the ending of this story. 2 days after the competition, Tyler was at the bike rack again. Same time, same routine, locking up his bicycle, adjusting his backpack. Madison was crossing the parking lot toward the main building when she saw him. She stopped. For a moment she just stood there. Then she walked over. Tyler looked up. "I owe you an apology," she said. "What I said in this parking lot, that was ugly, and it was wrong, and I'm sorry." He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. Not "don't worry about it," not "it's fine," just "okay," which somehow meant more than either of those things would have. It was acknowledgement without absolution, the truth of the moment, nothing more, nothing less. "For what it's worth," Madison said, "watching you up there, I think you might be one of the most remarkable people I've ever met." Tyler almost smiled. "I think you're probably smarter than you've been giving yourself credit for." She looked at him for a moment, then she nodded and she walked away. But here is the final revelation, the one that silenced everything. After the competition, one of the industry judges, a man named David Wren, a venture capitalist who'd backed several billion-dollar companies, pulled Tyler's file. Standard practice. And what he found made him pause. Tyler's father, his name had been James Bennett, and David Wren had known James Bennett. 20 years earlier, James Bennett, before the illness, before the financial collapse, before everything, had been a gifted young programmer who'd come up with an early concept for a social connectivity platform. He'd pitched it to a small group of investors, including a much younger David Wren. The investors had passed. The timing was off, they'd said. The idea wasn't developed enough. James Bennett had never had the resources to pursue it further. The platform that Tyler had built, the architecture, the underlying philosophy of connecting people who needed each other across distances, bore an unmistakable resemblance to his father's original concept. Tyler didn't know this. He'd built it from instinct, from need, from a 16-year-old boy's desperate attempt to find something solid to hold onto after losing the person who meant most to him. But James Bennett had planted something in his son without ever meaning to, without Tyler ever knowing. A vision that had traveled through grief and poverty and sacrifice and emerged on a stage at Hartwell University, 47,000 users strong and growing. David Wren sat with that file for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called Tyler. He told him everything. And then he doubled the seed funding offer. "Your father would have been extraordinary," David Wren said. "But I think he already was, because he raised you." There is a scratched-up bicycle that still gets locked to the rack outside the Hartwell Engineering building every morning. Most of the campus knows whose it is now. And the students who walk past it, the ones who know the story, don't laugh anymore. Some of them stop, and they look at it, and they think about what it means. It means that the most powerful thing in the room is not always the most visible thing. It means that quiet persistence is a force that luxury cannot buy and cruelty cannot break. It means that the people the world overlooks are sometimes carrying something so extraordinary inside them that the only reason you couldn't see it was because you weren't looking properly. And somewhere in rural Ohio, in a diner with slightly sticky menus and coffee that's always too hot, A woman named Carol Bennett gets a lot of questions from customers about her son. She always answers the same way. She doesn't talk about the money or the competition or the company. She talks about the morning he rode his bicycle 12 miles in the rain because the campus bus wasn't running, and he had an exam he refused to miss. She talks about the way he came home soaking wet, changed his shirt, sat down at that laptop, and kept going. He was always going to be fine, she says. He just needed the world to catch up to him. If this story moved you, if you felt something watching Tyler's journey from that parking lot to that stage, then you already understand why stories like this matter. Because somewhere out there right now, there is a Tyler, riding a bicycle, carrying something extraordinary, waiting for the world to catch up. Share this story, because the person who needs to hear it might be someone you love. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because every week, we bring you stories powerful enough to change the way you see the world. We'll see you in the next one.